And we can start letting people in. And I think
Sounds good.
yeah. You want to just go ahead and let people in. I'm going to turn off I'm going to turn off the noise that it makes when they come in because that's going to drive me insane. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give people a few minutes to get here. You can feel free to chat with us in the chat. I've got my co-host here, Robin. She's graciously agreed to help us manage everything. I'm going to make Kelly a co-host as well so she can unmute herself as she likes. There we go. Awesome. But while we're waiting for people to show up, if anybody has any questions to get started or any hopes or wishes that they want us to cover today, in case I forgot to put it in my list, I'd love to see anything that you're curious about. Kelly, how's it going? You still can't unmute? I thought I made you a co-host. Let me see. Hang on. Oh, it keeps switching people. There's so many people jumping in at the same time. Oh, yeah, it looks like I did. Okay, I asked you to unmute. All right, just a few more seconds and then we'll get started.
While you're waiting, Tonya said if you had something you specifically wanted to have her address, anything that was missed in that you're really hoping that you get to see, it's always good to put that in the chats, or you can ask any questions that you have, and this way she can answer it throughout the presentation.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, and Robin, you can feel free to interrupt me as I go. I like to have questions as they come up. That way they're asked in context. All right, Kelly, did it work this time?
Hey, there it
Yay!
is. Awesome.
Hey, how's
Hi,
it going?
everyone.
Good. I'm super excited. Get started. All right, let's do it. I think 2 minutes is enough time. If if you have any questions as I'm going, just go ahead and ask them, and Robin will give me a shout and let me know. Let's begin. Okay, first I wanted to introduce myself and give you my bubble background. So I started bubbling in August of 2020. It was that beautiful initial quarantine time, and I wanted a vacation, but I couldn't go anywhere. So I did a staycation and decided to learn bubble instead, and never went back to what I was doing before. I joined the partner program in AirDev as a developer in January of 2021. I quickly advanced to product manager. I was promoted to product manager trainer. And meanwhile, while doing all of that, I was busy founding this thing called Prono Coders, which is my business that I run now. We started with office hours in February of 2021, and that is our flagship product and what we're known for. It's where we meet right here on this Zoom 7 times per week. We have never canceled or postponed a session, and I conducted the 945th one this morning, and I'll be doing 946 tonight, and we'll be at 1,000 on May 8th, and I'm super excited about that. Our members are allowed to join any of our Zoom sessions in office hours and ask any no-code question that they like. And to give you some stats, today we had 5 members join. Each got to ask their question, and 2 stuck around and got to ask a second question. No Code School is another product of ours. We started it in March of 2022. We have over 200 hours of curriculum. We ran the full curriculum live twice. It includes a full course on what I'm about to cover today. So whatever I can't cover in 1 hour is covered in 20 something, maybe closer to 30 something hours in the product management course. And now I sell the recordings in the No Code School membership. So if you wanted to catch those recordings, they're available. And then finally, we are launching our co-development program. It's been formalized this month. It's our brand new program, and we're going to be helping people build their own apps with Bubble, but in a more formal way. And it all begins with this very conversation that we're going to have today on how to scope your app, exactly how I demonstrated here. So for our presentation, this recording is going to be submitted to Kelly at DevDay as soon as possible after we finish. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat and Robin will communicate them to me. I prefer to answer questions in context rather than at the end. Stay tuned until the end so you can get a copy of this Workflowy and other supporting materials that I have for you. And I have a request. So your first job, if you would, please use the chat to suggest an existing app feature that I can easily access for the final live exercise, which is called forensic scoping. So I'm going to take a brand new screen, maybe one that I've never seen before, maybe one that I've seen 1,000 times, and I'm going to do a forensic scope of it. It's an exercise I like to do to teach people to reverse engineer the scope, which is a first approximation to doing your own scope, writing your own scope. Please include the link in your message in the chat so Robin can send it to me when it's time. And then go ahead and vote on the suggestions you like. You can vote for as many of them as you want with a heart reaction. The one with the most reactions will be chosen. All right, that's it for the intro stuff. So let me close it all up because I like to keep things tidy while I'm talking. So why the heck would you do a scope? I honestly, as long as I've been doing scopes, I find it pretty funny that people are like, I don't need a scope. Why would I use a scope? The first reason is it serves as a source of truth for the work. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the scope as if there are multiple people who are collaborating and working together, including a product owner, product manager, and so forth. If you're the only person who's working on it, you can pretend that you're switching hats, right? The scope is going to serve as the agreement between the product owner and the person or team who is building the app, even if all of those people are the same person. This is going to help prevent scope creep. So once you have an established and agreed upon scope, then you know what fits in the scope and what doesn't fit in the scope. If you don't have it written down, if you haven't thought through everything, you're going to end up in an awkward situation where the product owner expects more than the developer or the team agreed to do, even if you're serving as both. I can't tell you how many times that I've worked with people who have been working on the initial builds of their app for way longer than they need to, simply because they didn't have the scope written out. They hadn't thought through it. It helps to establish a finish line. So this is to help prevent build creep. So scope creep is talked about a lot, where people keep adding to what you're going to build. Build creep is a different beast. It's where the developer wants to start building things in. They see opportunities. And so it might not be in the scope, but might not have been talked about, but because it wasn't scoped out, there's some ambiguity and they end up building things that aren't really needed or wanted. So if you have a scope, if it's in the scope, you get it done. If it's not, you can add it to the backlog for consideration in future builds and sprints. And it keeps you on time and keeps you much more effective and efficient. The scope serves as an anchor for pricing work. So if you're working as a freelancer or an agency and you need to price the work for a client, if you don't scope it out, all you have is the ability to take a wild guess and to how much it's going to cost and how much it's going to take, how much time it's going to take. That's going to put you and the client both in a really awkward position because it's not fair. One person or the other will end up frustrated. The client might be frustrated because they thought it was going to get done faster or cost less money, and the developer might be committed to things that they didn't know it was going to take that long, and they agreed to do it for less money than they should have. So don't do that. Scope instead. The scope also acts as an anchor for communication. So whether you need to see how much progress you've made, using the scope as a checklist of things to get done can make it a lot easier for you to see how far you've gotten. Or if there's a dispute, if you're in a client builder relationship and the client says, hey, you should build this and you don't think you should, you can look at the scope and see if if the client's right or if you're right. For progress, the scope can be used as a checklist for multiple roles, not just the developer. So you have a UX designer, a UI implementer, developer, and QA. They can all use the scope to figure out what should be done. For disputes, a proper scope defines requirements clearly, so you really can clear things up. So who's involved in this whole scoping process? Well, or using the scope. All of these roles. So product owner, product manager, project manager, UX designer, UI implementer, developer, and QA, whether you're playing all of the roles or one of the roles, all of these different roles interact with the scope in my experience. What is a scope? Well, a scope is an organized document delineating the product or feature that is going to be built. It can be comprehensive and incorporate every part of the app. That's what we do when we do an initial build. We scope the whole thing out. Or if you're just taking on a single feature and building a single feature, you might need to scope just that feature and see how it's going to interact with the rest of the app. It generally includes both written and visual components. So usually it's not enough to just write what needs to happen. Most of the time we need a visual component to help communicate the idea fully to the developer. And the anatomy of a scope, like the different parts of a full initial build scope here, include a purpose. The purpose is going to be like your long-term vision for the app in general. It includes an objective. That's the short term, like what are we going to accomplish in this particular build? Differentiating the users. So I do this by user experience. So if two users have distinctly different experiences within the app, then I usually like to separate them into different roles, including like an app admin, a standard user, or sometimes there's two different kinds of standard users, like a buyer and a seller. I've worked in apps with as many as 7 different roles. So pardon me a moment, I'm gonna take a sip of water. Then the anatomy of scope also includes a list of the actual bubble pages that you're going to be working on. And then within the bubble pages, you also have to include the different sections. I usually like the sections to be in their own reusables. Then you're going to talk about the general functionality like the header and footer. So these persist across different pages, so I separate them out. You're going to list out the different kinds of notifications and the different methods of notifications that you're going to include in the app. For the design part of the scope, generally determine colors, fonts, and the hierarchy of both, along with logos. Then you use the scope that you've done for the pages and the general functionality and notifications to inform the database. So you design the database before you ever touch the app. And then you delineate which services are going to be used. This can help the client or you figure out how much it's going to cost to run your app. And after you get all of that done, then you kind of decide which things you're going to build first. I like to call them milestones. You can call them features, whatever you like to do. I tend to try to chunk out the work in weekly sections and then price it as per week. You have to be as realistic as possible, because if you're not realistic as you're scoping, it's going to be unfair to someone, either the client or to the developer. It's going to be unfair to someone. So you have to be as realistic as possible. That said, you cannot beat yourself up for getting it wrong, because I don't think I've ever worked on a project where we nailed it and we got it right. I think I've only ever worked on one project where it was overestimated. It didn't take as long as we thought it was going to be. It happened one time. So page scoping examples. So what does a scope look like? Well, a couple years ago, I did a forensic scope of Google's homepage. And then recently, I've also done one for an Instagram post preview. And so, give you context, pretend you're arriving at the homepage at google.com as a logged in user. And in this case, as a logged in user with a workspace Google email. The purpose of the page, define the purpose just like I just talked about. The purpose of the page is a little bit different than the purpose of the whole app. Define who can stay on that page. And then you define the view and activity. And the purpose of showing you this scope isn't really to just show you what a scope could look like. It's actually to make a different point entirely. So when we go to Google here, if you look at it and somebody said, hey, I want you to build this page in Bubble, and we are always forever getting people who say, I want a clone of some kind of app, right? I want an Airbnb clone. I want an Etsy clone, right? People want clones all the time. If someone came to you and asked you for a clone of this page, right? And said, I just want my app to be like this page and to work like this page. And we'll use an API to get the search working. You don't have to actually build an indexing software. It looks pretty easy, but looks can be deceiving because when you start actually going from top left to top right and across, and you identify all of the pieces of what's happening on this page, you suddenly end up realizing, okay, well, if I click Gmail, it's going to take me to the Gmail. That's just navigation. That's not too hard. Same with images. But I click this 9 dots icon here, and now I have a different screen. And actually, if I scroll down, I have 2 different sections of the screen, and I have this button at the bottom. So I have to scope this out. And then if I click on my initial here, and I look, I say, oh, there are actually lots of different things I can click on in this interface. I have to scope this out too to make sure that the developer knows exactly what I want to have happen on each of these things. And then you even think, oh, well, this looks simple. And my sister just had a baby yesterday, so I was looking up baby names. So you see the search queries here, and you think, oh, well, that's easy enough. They're just going to enter a few words, and that's going to be what they do. But actually, if you get into it, it's much more complicated than that. And suddenly, you're looking at this view and activity section, and I didn't even finish it. It was too much for me to finish doing all of these different pieces. But the formula is the same. The formula is you start at the top right of the screen and you find every interaction that the user can have on the page, and you define what the interaction is and what happens when the user does it. And that turns into a big long list of all of the stuff, and it keeps going and it keeps going. And all, like I said, I didn't even finish it. And this is just for this simple Google page. So if you think you don't need to scope, even on simple pages, be careful because looks can be deceiving. So give you a look at the Instagram one as well. If I can find the top here. There you go. So Google homepage, so the Instagram one, if I just open that up, you can see looks simple enough. Not a whole lot of different things you can do in here, or at least it seems that way. But once you start interacting, you start realizing that there's a lot more to it. So where does the scope exist? We're actually going to go into more detail in the live exercise where I'm forensic scoping. So you'll get to see how I think about each of these things. So the scope is a process. It starts with the first meeting that you have with the product owner, and it continues through all of your meetings and some homework that you have to do to get it done. So the first is getting the meetings done, then you go off and you write it, and then you communicate with the product owner and they tell you what changes they want. It takes time, and it's important to take that time to knock out a great scope. I believe that the steps earlier in the process should not be rushed, as the time you spend on the earlier steps cuts down on the time you have to spend in the future fixing things. Meetings I prefer to do in Zoom. For communications, I prefer Slack over email, and then within some other software like Workflowy and Airtable. For files, I prefer Google Drive, and I usually make a PDF of the whole scope and add it as an addendum to the contract before the build begins. When should you scope? First thing. Starts from the very first conversation you have with the product owner, even if you are the product owner yourself. I only ever do fixed costs on initial builds. I just wanted to toss that in there because I talk a lot about how important it is to scope out before you quote a price. If I'm quoting a price on an initial build, it would be a fixed price. On an addition to an app, it would not be, it would be an estimate. And it's important to make that distinction to protect yourself. The reason is because on an initial build, you don't have tech debt that you have to work against. So how to scope? Here are the steps that I take in scoping. The first one is discovery. The product owner informs the product manager about their ideas for the app. Can include the general concept, the short and long-term goals, ideas for features, inspiration from other sites and apps. Then the product manager offers a scoping estimate and a timeline, and the product owner can choose to engage. I charge for scoping, and it's non-refundable because it's a lot of work, as you might have noticed when I was scrolling through endless pages of it just above. I base the cost of the scope on 10% of the estimated total cost for the build based on what I know at the time that I start scoping. While it's not refundable, if the client chooses to continue with the build with me, then I apply what's been paid for the scope toward the cost of the total build. The next step, if they choose to engage, is we've done the discovery, is we move into Mad Lib scoping. Mad Lib scoping is a term I coined 2 years ago in no code school. And informed about the idea, the product manager conducts a Mad Lib scoping interview, is what I call it. It's where the product manager takes their expertise and asks a series of questions to the client or the product owner. And it's about critical choices the product owner needs to make before doing the scope. So there are several points when you're making decisions, building an app, that once you make that decision, if you decide to change your mind later, if you want to go back and do it a different way, it's going to cost a lot of time and a lot of money to make that a different choice. So it's really important, I think, to identify those critical choices to the client or product owner when you start, so that they understand that it's not just how you feel in the moment. You need to take a step back and really think through how you want your app to be and be confident in your choice, because if you make the wrong choice here, it's going to cost you later. An example of some of those choices for a two-sided marketplace would be what and how to sell. So if someone says, hey, I want to develop a marketplace and I want some users to buy things from other users, right? That's a very common thing. When we get down to it, we say, okay, well, what kind of sale is it going to be? Are people buying things one time, or are they buying a subscription? If it's a subscription, is it going to be monthly or annual or both? Do we need to worry about prorating, like moving from monthly to annual? Should there be prorations? If it's a subscription, monthly subscription, do they get a certain amount of something, either quantity or credits of something? Is there a free trial? All of these things are really important because they inform how you plan out and scope your payment system. Another thing would be, okay, well, you're going to sell some things. Is it physical good? Is it a virtual good? Is it going to have any variations? So maybe I'm going to sell a single physical or virtual product and it's not going to have any variations. That's much more simple than selling either multiple of the same thing or multiple things with variations. Each each point here gets more and more complex. But even within selling a single physical or virtual product without variations, you still have to say, okay, well, do I really need a shopping cart if I'm just going to buy one thing, right? What kinds of sales? Am I going to do direct sale where you see it, you want it, you buy it, like Ariana Grande, or maybe we're going to do auctions like on eBay and see how much we can get by having people bid and a timer runs out. Multiple physical virtual products without variations. Now we have to worry about inventory and a shopping cart, so where someone can increase the number of things that they're purchasing or decrease. So you have to manage, you develop an inventory system that's going to add a lot of complexity. Maybe we're going to have a single shopping cart. Are we going to allow multiple sellers' products into the same single shopping cart, or does each seller get their own shopping cart per buyer, like who wants to shop from them? Is there a single checkout for all of your shopping carts? How are you going to design that? Because there's a lot of ways to do it, and it can get very complicated very quickly. When you start dealing with product variations, you might decide to skimp back and be more simple with your checkout process, right? So maybe you only want a single shopping cart if you're going to allow variations, because variations, there can be a lot of them. Maybe there's different sizes, maybe they're different colors. Maybe there are different features or benefits that you can add or subtract, like if you're buying a car. Then is the marketplace going to be general or niche? So anyone can sell anything, like Amazon is a very different proposition than someone can sell cat t-shirts, right? Like the more narrow you are and what is being sold in the marketplace, the easier it is to build the marketplace. Then you need to consider promotions. So in addition to how are they going to pay one-off subscription and which payment processor are you going to use, you have to think through the method of promotions. If you're gonna, are you going to have promotions? If so, what method? Are you going to do coupons or sales, or are you, and who's going to drive the decision to run a sale? Is it going to be the app that decides, or are you going to give the seller the ability to run their own sale, right? An example of that would be Udemy often runs a sale for the entire site, and they let their course creators opt out of those sales sometimes or opt into them. So is it the app that's going to drive the sale, or is it the seller who's going to decide, hey, I'm going to put a sale, everything is 10% off of my shop? So these are the kinds of critical questions that you can't change very easily once you get started. If you decide to change it, it's going to be scrapping everything you built and starting over, or refactoring what you've built, and a lot of work to do that. So once you have the Mad Lib scoping exercise done, you move into the scoping outline. This is the combination of what you found in the discovery by asking the client a bunch of questions. Everything you discovered in the Mad Lib scoping interview, and also the anatomy of the scope that we covered above. This defines the pages and sections that need to be delineated in the scope, which is the majority of the work in the scoping process. The scoping itself, fill out the scope outline with the stuff of the scope. There's the written part, right? So you've got the written part, which is bullets on what the user can do and what happens when they do it. And then you have the wireframes, like the rough sketches of the interface. For the written part, for initial builds, I like to use Workflowy, which is this program that you see me using right now. I think in hierarchical lists, so I'm very compatible with Workflowy. I've been using it for a really long time. It's also really inexpensive. It's like $5 per month. For subsequent work, I actually prefer to use Airtable so that I can assign statuses to things. An example of an Airtable that I used with a client, I've got here like the task name, notes. We've got the type of task, the status of the task. I can do my points estimates. So this is the template that I use, and if you stick around, you'll find out how you can get a copy of this template. For the wireframes, I am not a designer. Maybe you can tell because I'm using Workflowy that it's design is not my thing. Making things look pretty is not my thing. Making things work logically is my thing. So I communicate visually best with Balsamiq, which I find much simpler and much easier to use than Figma and other things. It's only $9 per month for 2 projects, and I only use one project for all of my different screens. Other people like Figma and other platforms better. You choose what works for you and what makes you the most capable of communicating the visual parts of the scope to the client or product owner and the UX designer. Once you have the written part and the visual part done, you can turn it over to the product owner for review and approval. Once the scope is written and mocked up, the product owner gets to review and flag anything that needs to be reworked. Once the product owner is satisfied, it can be finalized and utilized in a contract. I have like an extension, like full page screenshot that will do like a really long screenshot. So I usually take a screenshot, make it into a PDF, and stick it into the contract as the source of truth to outline the deliverables of the development work. Then comes the UX design part. I'm not a designer, but I think it's really important to do this part where you get really high fidelity mockups before you build the rest of it. So after the contract is signed and the first payment for the first milestone is made, in my process at PronoCoders, I hand it off to my UX designer, and he builds designs in Figma, but he does not build everything in Figma that I did in Balsamiq. Usually what I do is I hand off some Balsamiq wireframes that look like this, and I choose very specific ones. I choose the ones that are going to include like a table and then the overall layout of a portal. Any of the specialty screens that are looking different because I need something specific. So I just hand off a few screens to the designer, always a form, and then I have the designer go through and create the high fidelity mockups. And then I have my UI implementation specialist take these mockups, just these few screens, and create them in Bubble. And then everything that I put in here can be copied and pasted elsewhere in the app. And that's how we build out the rest of the designs in Bubble. And so this is an example of the tables and things that we were having built for Rosie recruits. And then you can see this is what's actually in Bubble that my UI implementation specialist did. So I've already kind of explained how that works. It goes from UX design and then UI implementation. And then there's development. There's not much to say about it. You just use what's there and develop the logic to make everything work as per the scope. And finally, we've got the QA. So both the internal QA person and the product owner test the app and add tasks to the backlog and Airtable, which I've shown you. And then the developer categorizes the tasks as being either a bug, a missing feature, something to refactor, or a feature request. Bugs are in scope and not working as scoped. Missing feature is in scope and missing from the app. Those get taken care of automatically in initial build because we've agreed to build exactly what we scoped. Refactoring and feature requests go into a backlog, and maybe we fit it in and maybe we don't. It depends on how long things are taking.
Tonya, can I interrupt?
Yeah,
Andy
of
had a
course.
question, just a clarifying thing. He said he wanted to know, did you say that you copy from Figma to Bubble?
No, I don't. I have the UX designer design in Figma, and then I have the UI implementation specialist recreate the designs in Bubble. Yeah.
He says, got it. Thank you.
Good question. Yeah. And then the rest of the tasks that are like the refactor and feature requests are collected in full. Oh, so about the timeline of working on these. If you have a breaking bug or a missing feature when you're building and it's critical to testing everything else, you fix those immediately because you have to, because it bottlenecks the entire project. But the rest of the tasks are collected in full, categorized, prioritized, and then worked on within the capacity of the build. And that brings us to that's the whole process of what we do when we build an app at Pro No Coders. And now we can do the live exercise of forensic scoping. How did it go, Robin? Did we decide on something?
Yeah, so we had we had two things. One person asked if we could do a feature that uses a map to locate bikes for rentals, and then I submitted the hotel location information, like to be able to see room types on a hotel. But the bike feature had well, it looks like it had more, but it looks like some of them went away. So it looks like it's kind of a tie. So, but I don't know if you wanted to do the bike features for a feature that uses maps to locate bikes for rentals. I don't know if you need more information on that.
Oh, is there an existing app that does this?
Danielle, go ahead and let us know if you already have an existing page that Tonya can jump into. She said she doesn't know, so I think it was just an idea.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking about an app that already exists. So something that already exists that you want to see.
All right. And
Let's
then
see.
somebody said a tip one out of maybe 20 bubble projects, one converted to an end from Figma to Bubble. And that was only during the first day. So, so we could, did you want people to submit other ideas, like existing websites of like how to reverse engineer that
Yeah,
or
I
different
mean,
things?
I guess we can come up with something. Let's see. I've already done Instagram and I've done Google. Maybe we do what what, what did
I
people
mean,
say? I was hoping to outsource this decision. So so let's see. How about let's do one with a map feature. Let's use one that we are
somebody just suggested the DevDave Live app.
Yes. Okay, let's do it. I
That's a
love
great
it.
idea, Serge.
All right. So
Or Sergey,
let's
sorry.
let's
It's all
start
new
with
from what it was yesterday. So
oh, even better. Even better. Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to just make a screenshot of the top of the page here. And then I'm going to take this in Workflowy and I'm going to say dev day dot live. And I'm going to say screen collapse. This is a part of using Workflowy. I have my own conventions, and I'll explain why I do the screen collapsed and then paste the screenshot, and then I tag it as screen. And the reason I do that in Workflowy is because when I search and I say screen collapsed, I can see where all of my screens are very quickly. And then if I do my hashtag screen, then I can actually see the screens and navigate through my scope faster. So that's why I do that. So now I've got this screen collapsed. I can come in here, open it up. And so I'm just going to start from the very top left and go over to the right. And I'm going to look and I'm going to say, oh, there's this button. There's the logout button. I'm just going to assume that if I click it, it's going to log me out. I don't want to be logged out right now, but I'm just going to pretend that that's the case. And Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong. So user
got
can
it.
click the logout button, logs the user out, right? You might think that you shouldn't have to spell that out, and maybe you don't, but I can't begin to tell you how many times I end up in pop-ups that have an X icon that doesn't work because the developer just forgot to add it in. But if the developer had it as a bullet point in a scope, the developer would notice that they didn't do it because they'd go and test and they'd realize, oh, I can't do that. So I need to do that. Then next up, the next interaction on the page here, I can read all of this stuff, but I don't need to write that down. But here I can start to click on things. So the user can click on a tab and it changes the view, right? So I can describe those tabs and I can say user can click on the all tab, opens all of the session or filters to all of the sessions. Filters to all of the sessions. User can click on the, what's the next tab here? On attending. On the attending tab. Filters to only sessions for which the user has RSVP'd. User can click on the hosting tab. Hosting tab, and then that filters to only sessions for which the user is the host, right? And so forth. Let's move to here. So user can click on the join here, navigates to a different page. I'm going to open it in a new link. Oh, that's the Zoom. Then how to join sessions, another click. Oh, this one's not actually a click. So
Oops.
this one I should have been able to click and do the email. No, it's fine. I can always copy and paste. So this is the how the forensic scoping works. Is you would go through and say, okay, well, I'm hovering over here, so user can hover over a tile and they can click the hosting session. So you would describe that. You would say, user can hover over a session tile, reveals the host a session button. User can click the button, and what does it do? It probably gives us a
It
form.
scrolls down to the bottom. It's broken.
It's broken. It's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. But here I have control when I'm scoping, so I can highlight it and say it should do this instead. I want it to do something different instead, right?
It
So
should show a form is what it should do. But yeah.
yeah, shows the host a session or opens the host a session pop-up probably, right?
No, it's like a section of the page. It's actually at the very bottom now, but it used to be at the top, so it would scroll to it.
A session form, right?
Yep.
Yep. And then on another tile that's showing here, I can click the bookmark, so I can bookmark something. So user can click the bookmark icon, saves the session to the user's bookmarks. User can click the share icon. I think that's a share icon, right?
Just copies a link.
Share icon copies the link to the session to the user's clipboard. User can click the RSVP button. RSVPs the user to the session, right? So this is the best way to learn how to scope, is to just take several pages and do that, write everything out. Apparently it's also a really good way to find bugs, right? Because you'll find things that aren't working and to learn the app, because you're finding all of the places you can click and you can enter something into. So if you're interested in the materials here so that you can see the whole presentation, including all of the example scopes and this forensic scoping exercise, you can kind of get a good handle on how I handle certain things on in a repeating pattern. And to do that, just go ahead and email me at team@pronocoders and let me know if you want the Workflowy link or the Airtable template, And yeah, that's it. That's how I keep on the same page for myself and with partners and clients when I'm building apps using scoping. So I'll open it up for any remaining questions that we have.
I think the biggest question that, Andy had was, well, this is so great, this workflow document, and how can I get it? And you just answered that question. If you have other questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. And Tonya would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, or you can raise
Raise your hand.
if you want me to unmute you.
I'll throw one out while people are thinking. I've had a couple clients before, sort of like, you scope out the whole thing, you even build the whole thing, and then they're like, well, of course it needs to do this other thing. Like, to them, it's so obvious that and they don't necessarily understand that what you scoped out is all of it, like literally all of it. So I wonder, I don't know if that's something you've come upon, or in having it so detailed that communicates that if it's not in here, it's not happening.
So I usually have a pretty frank conversation with my clients when they're reading the scope. And I mean, people don't like to read, right? I've learned this a long time ago. People just don't like to read. But I warn them and I say, look, this is going to serve as part of our contract. So it's really important that you think clearly about everything that's written and decide if you want to change, because if you want to change, it's likely going to cost you more. But if it's in the scope and we've written it out and we've agreed on how it's going to go, when you get to it and you say, hey, this is a bug, it's not working the way that was scoped, I'm going to fix it because you're right, it's in the scope. And if it's a feature that's in the scope and it's missing from the app, I'm not even going to blink an eye. I'm just going to go and add that feature because it's acting as our source of truth. So I explain the process and exactly how we're going to take their feedback, keep the backlog of anything that they want changed. And then I'm also explain that, I'm not going to like save everything to the backlog and charge you more. The things that I can do for you that fit within the capacity of the scope, which I'm adding a little bit of buffer to, right? I will do, but the bigger things I won't be able to get to without charging you more. So it's important to read the scope. But
Thanks.
yeah, it's a good question.
How do you handle when a client is saying something like, I know I kind of want it to work like this, but they're like, maybe they're not quite sure how they want to have something display, or they're not sure what the functionality of Bubble is to fully describe it for you to scope. How do you handle that through like a call, or how do you usually work through that process with clients?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So I don't expect the clients to know how they want certain features to work. I just expect them to come to me with like, I want the user to be able to accomplish this thing. And they might have an idea of how they want it to look, or might have an idea of how they want it to function, or how the database should be changed. But sometimes they just have the general idea, and that's where I come in and I suggest how we could accomplish it in the interface, and then also with the logic.
That's really helpful, because I think sometimes, especially if somebody comes from a non-programming background, they might not realize that one thing is really difficult and really expensive to do. And one thing, we could go a different path and have a much less expensive, much better MVP kind of option.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the pieces of the Airtable template that I love so much. And I don't have it in this particular example, but I use the point estimator here, and it's just a number. And I've moved to doing a one-to-one. So when I estimate points, I'm estimating the amount of hours that it's going to take to complete a particular task. And then what I instruct my clients to do is use that information, realize that it's an estimate, right? It's not written in stone. I'm not telling you that it's going to take exactly that long and it will only cost that much. I'm telling you, hey, I think I can get it done for this amount of time, which is really a heuristic for how complex I think the task is going to be. And then they can use that information once they have it, they can use that information to decide whether they want task number 6 or task number 7 to go first. And so when I'm in the part of the build where after the build has been done and they're giving feedback on something, or they're coming up with different ideas on what they want to build, even before, I can give them a point estimate. I do not scope it out before I do the point estimate, because I only want to scope so far into the list, because scoping takes time and it takes energy and it costs money for the client. So I want to make sure that it's what they want before I scope it out. So I'll do the point estimate to start with. And then when I scope it out, the point estimate might actually change, but it's given them a really good idea on which are the low hanging fruit tasks versus the more complex tasks.
I think that's really helpful. Danielle wanted to let you know that it's a wonderful presentation, and thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
so
welcome.
and then there might be somebody like sitting in my chair that's looking at their app and being like, yeah, I didn't really do a very good job scoping everything out. What would you say, like the benefit? I know you said to debug, but if maybe somebody is working on an app and maybe they're trying to figure out what the next step, or if it's worth them going back to do this forensic scoping, what would you say to somebody that maybe they had a rough outline, but they didn't do things in depth the way that you have outlined here?
So if you have an existing app, there's I would probably recommend doing an audit and deciding whether your app is salvageable, or if it would actually be faster to scope it out and rebuild it. Rebuilding comes with, I mean, there's positive and negatives to both refactoring and rebuilding. But generally, like I just had a conversation with a client earlier, and he chose he started building his app 3 years ago before the new responsive editor was available, and so his app is still in the old responsive editor, and it has a lot of tech debt from multiple developers. And so we're looking at rebuilding the app versus refactoring the app, and that's going to start with a forensic scope of what he already has, right? So you can use the forensic scoping exercise I just did, forensically scope your app to see what you already have. And that can actually serve as the foundation. And that's what we're planning to do with this app from earlier today. We'll use the forensic scope as a starting place for a new scope, and then make the decision whether it's cost and time effective to refactor versus rebuild.
Awesome. And we've got a question from Besarin, and we can go ahead and ask him to unmute. I don't know if we need to make him.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can find
Yeah.
this. Hang on. Let me.
Hi, Tonya. You hear
Hi,
me?
Balsamiq. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. That was great.
Mhm.
Just quick question. Do you usually start from the front end or the back end when you are designing? I mean, when you're building the application for the client. Also, do you always have to use Figma? Because I don't usually use it. I start right away from Bubble.
No. So if you're building it yourself, you don't necessarily have to use Figma. And if you're good at design and you like doing the design, I don't actually do the design implementation in the apps that I work on. I have team members who are way better than I am at that. So the answer would be, when you first start working in your app, it's the front end first. So it's the design stuff, the design implementation before the database before the logic.
Okay, cool. I guess I'm on the right path. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Any other questions?
feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat if you aren't in a location where you feel comfortable unmuting. But this has been I think this has been really helpful, and I think it will save people a lot of time. I know that I'm always tempted to just rush ahead. I'm doing that right now in a project, but this is a good reminder of, and a reminder of the messes that I have made from the times that I did skip over this, and especially when you're working with clients, how powerful it is to making sure you don't end up in a sticky situation with expectations or upset, or, and protecting your reputation.
Yeah, and just know that nobody is perfect at this. I have never met anybody who is perfect at this. So it's a work in progress always. But if you want copies of the materials, go ahead and email me at team@pronocoders.com, and I'll try to get those answered today by the end of the day. And if that's it for questions, I hope everybody has a great day. I'm headed over to Eli's session, so I will see you all there. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Tonya.
Thank you for such a great presentation.
Thank you, Kelly.
See you guys.